A recent breach of AT&T's cloud workspace hosted on Snowflake, which you may remember as the same attack vector exploited in a Ticketmaster breach reported on last week, exposed phone numbers and metadata related to calls and texts for nearly all AT&T wireless customers and those of virtual network operators using AT&T's network like Boost Mobile and Cricket Wireless. The breach, which occurred between April 14th and April 25th, 2024, was disclosed a whole 3 months later, only due to the U.S. Department of Justice intervention. During the breach, hackers exfiltrated call and text records from May 1st to October 31st of 2022 and January 2nd, 2023. The stolen data included phone numbers, interaction counts, and aggregate call durations. Some records also contained cell site identification numbers, which are unique identifiers assigned to cell towers and base stations, which could potentially provide insights into the user's geographical location and movement patterns over time. While the content of calls and texts, social security numbers, and other personal identifiable information were not compromised, the metadata could still be used to infer sensitive details about individuals' lives, which may pose risks of sophisticated phishing attempts, identity theft, and social engineering attacks. The DOJ has apprehended at least one individual in connection to the breach. None of this would have happened if AT&T had not been storing this information in the first place. I can't imagine storing extensive call and text records like this is essential for providing basic telecommunication services, especially nowadays where everything is unlimited. And even if it is used to monitor network usage to better understand where to provide more resources or infrastructure, the data could have been anonymized before storing. To me, this data retention just seems like an unnecessary risk to customer privacy and is probably just used to collect your data for monetization purposes. This data could also have been used for surveillance or handed over to government agencies or even private third parties without proper oversight. This whole incident just goes to show the need for stricter data minimalization practices and a shift in policy where companies should only collect and store the data necessary for their services. Microsoft's July Patch Tuesday addressed a total of 143 security vulnerabilities, 2 of which are already being actively exploited in the wild. The first actively exploited vulnerability affects Windows Hyper-V and allows attackers to elevate privileges on compromised systems. This flaw is considered easy to exploit, requiring no special privileges or interaction. Successful exploitation could enable an attacker to gain system-level access. The second actively exploited vulnerability targets the Microsoft HTML browser engine used by the now discontinued Internet Explorer browser, exploiting its out-of-date infrastructure to execute arbitrary code on victims' machines. Attackers utilized a novel technique involving internet shortcut files that appeared as innocuous PDF documents to the user. When clicked, these files redirected users to malicious websites, exploiting a trick in Internet Explorer to disguise the true nature of the file being opened. The researcher who identified and reported this vulnerability to Microsoft highlighted the severity of the issue, emphasizing that it allowed attackers to potentially deploy ransomware, spyware, or other forms of malware. In addition to these actively exploited flaws, Microsoft Update addressed a range of critical vulnerabilities affecting various components such as .NET, Visual Studio, and remote desktop licensing service. The patches aim to mitigate risks associated with remote code execution, privilege escalation, data theft, and other malicious activities. Microsoft has also integrated a patch for a third-party CVE related to Intel microprocessors into its update. Given the severity and active exploitation of some of these vulnerabilities, organizations and individuals are strongly advised to prioritize these patches to secure their systems against potential cyber threats. Netgear has issued a warning to its customers to promptly update their Wi-Fi 6 routers following a discovery of some serious security flaws. Specifically, the company has patched stored cross-site scripting and authentication bypass vulnerabilities affecting several of their models. These vulnerabilities could allow threat actors to hijack user sessions, gain unauthorized access to administrative interfaces, and potentially take over affected devices entirely. Router vulnerabilities are particularly problematic due to their direct exposure to the internet. Unlike many other devices that operate within closed networks, routers serve as a gateway between private networks and the vast public internet. This public exposure makes them easy targets for cybercriminals. Netgear has urged users to download and install the latest firmware via their support panel to mitigate these risks effectively. Anyone familiar with ethical hacking or penetration testing likely recognizes the infamous RockU word list, a collection of widely used passwords which is used for password cracking exercises. Recently, a new massive list called RockU 2024 was released on a cyber underground forum by a hacker known as Obamacare. This word list contains nearly 10 billion, that's billion with a B, unique passwords collected from various data breaches. This poses a significant risk of credential stuffing attacks, where hackers will try to reuse passwords revealed in a breach across multiple different victims' accounts, exploiting the fact that most people use the same email and password combination for most, if not all, of their accounts. This is why password managers and using unique credentials for every account is so important. If you don't use a password manager yet, you need to look at making it a priority to get one in order to limit the damage when, not if, but when something like this happens again. I personally recommend Bitwarden. It's open source, their hosted service is free for individuals, and you also have the ability to host it on your own hardware. I'll drop a link to Bitwarden below if you're interested. Adobe has released critical security patches addressing multiple vulnerabilities across Adobe Premiere Pro, Adobe InDesign, and Adobe Bridge for both Windows and Mac OS platforms. The updates, part of Adobe's Patch Tuesday release, aim to mitigate several code execution bugs that could allow attackers to execute arbitrary code on affected systems. Adobe advises users to promptly install these patches to protect against potential exploitation, but says there are currently no known exploits in the wild targeting these vulnerabilities.